All right, let's dive into the world of Peacock base care. We've got a ton of awesome info to unpack from the materials you sent in.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Peacock base are those fish with the crazy colors and patterns, real showstoppers in an aquarium.
They're stunning.
But, and this is a big but, they're not your typical beginner fish.
Nope, not at all. You really got to be ready for a challenge with these guys.
Like imagine trying to keep a tiny tiger in your living room. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the perfect analogy. They have that wild energy,
Yeah.
You need a ton of respect for them, and you have to be ready to give them what they need. Specialized care, for sure.
So where do these little tigers come from originally?
The Amazon River Basin, primarily. Although you find them in other freshwater spots in South America, too.
But it's that Amazon connection that really matters, right? I mean, it affects how we take care of them in our tanks.
For sure. I mean, they're apex predators out in the wild. Knowing that is key. It changes everything, their behavior, the food they need, everything we have to do to keep them happy in a tank.
And speaking of adaptations, have you ever noticed that eye spot near their tail? The ocelli, it's like nature's little trick.
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant. That eye spot fools predators into attacking the tail instead of the head. It gives the peacock base a chance to make a quick escape.
Evolution is wild.
Totally.
So there are a few different species of peacock base that people keep. Are there any major differences we need to be aware of?
Definitely. You can't just lump them all together. Knowing the specific species is super important because their care needs can be pretty different.
Yeah.
You've got the Cichla ocellaris, probably the most common one in the hobby.
Right.
Then there's Cichla monoculus,
Okay.
and then the Cichla temensis, the monster. Those can get huge.
How huge are we talking?
Up to 36 inches. That's bigger than some dogs, I'm telling you.
Seriously. Wow. Okay, so we're talking serious tank space here. But before we get into all that, let's talk about their personality. Are they as fierce as they look?
Oh, yeah. They've got attitude, let me tell you. Curious fish, super assertive, and their territory. Forget about it. They rule that tank. It's their kingdom.
But I've heard they can actually be pretty interactive with their owners, almost like they recognize you.
Oh, they know what's up. They know who brings the food. But that brings up a really important point, tank mates. You got to be super careful who you put in there with the peacock base.
Yeah.
I mean, to them, a little guppy isn't a friend, it's lunch.
Oh, wow. So no peaceful community tank for these guys.
No way.
Yeah.
Plus, you got to watch out for their dominance displays. Flaring fins,
Yeah.
little mock charges, that kind of thing. It's natural for them, but it can be pretty scary for other fish.
Noted. Okay, so tank setup. What kind of palace does a peacock base need to really thrive?
Think fortress, not palace.
Hmm.
We're talking big.
Hmm.
At least 250 gallons for just one peacock base.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bare minimum.
250.
Yep. And if you want more fish, or if you're dealing with a bigger species, you got to go even bigger.
Makes sense. So I'm guessing the shape of the tank matters too.
Absolutely. The footprint, the length, and the width, that's way more important than how tall it is. They come from these wide, slow-moving rivers. They need that horizontal space to swim around, not so much up and down.
Makes sense. So big tank, lots of horizontal space. What about filtration? I can only imagine what kind of waste these big guys produce.
You're telling me. They're like little waste machines. You got to go heavy duty on the filtration. Canister filter's a good start, maybe even a sump system if you can swing it.
And to keep that Amazon vibe going, we need to think about water flow, right? Gentle current, like in their natural habitat.
Totally. It helps keep the water oxygenated, keeps things moving, no stagnant water.
And speaking of water, what about quality? I know peacock base can be a little picky, right?
You bet. They need super stable water conditions. They don't like change. So you got to be on top of your game here.
So what are the magic numbers we're aiming for?
Aim for a temperature between 78 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The pH should be slightly acidic to neutral, like 6.5 to 7.5. And general hardness, keep that moderate. 5 to 12 DGH is the sweet spot.
Okay, so stability is key. Lots of testing and water changes, right?
You got it. Think of it like, keeping their home clean. Fresh air, clean water. That's the key to keeping them healthy and happy. And speaking of keeping things clean and tidy, what about decorations? Can we go wild with plants and ornaments? Let's just say peacock base have their own idea of interior design. They love rearranging things.
Oh no, I can already see it. Chaos.
Pretty much. So stick to sturdy stuff. Rocks, driftwood, things that won't get knocked over easily.
So no delicate plants then.
Yeah, those are going to be uprooted in no time. If you want plants, go for tough ones. Java fern, anubias, things like that. And make sure you attach them to rocks or driftwood so they don't become floating snacks.
Okay, got it. Tough plants for tough fish. Now, I'm getting hungry just thinking about all this tank setup. Let's talk about food. How
Yeah.
do we feed these river monsters? I mean, they're carnivores, right?
Oh, yeah. In the wild, they're ambush predators. They just wait and then, bam, they strike. To keep them healthy in a tank, we got to give them that carnivorous diet.
So what's on the menu for a hungry peacock base?
Variety is key. Live food is great, like feeder fish. But be careful where you get them from. You don't want to introduce diseases.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Exactly. Frozen food is good too. Shrimp, prawns, stuff like that. And then there's high-quality pellets. Those are great for a balanced diet.
But I've heard peacock bays can be picky eaters, especially when they get older.
That's true. That's why you got to start them young. Get them used to pellets early on. It's much easier to train them when they're juveniles.
Good tip. Okay, so we've covered their predatory instincts, but is there any chance other fish can actually share a tank with a peacock base? Or are we talking solo act?
Well, it's not exactly a party in there, but there are a few tough guys who might be able to handle the heat. We got to play a game of, will they survive in a tank with a peacock bass?
I love it. This is going to be brutal. So who are our contenders?
Well, arowanas might have a chance. They're big and tough with a similar temperament. And then some of the bigger South American six-lids, like Oscars or Jaguar six-lids.
Okay, so we're talking big and bold personalities only. What about something a little more, chill?
Maybe some beachers or those large catfish,
Yeah.
red-tailed or pictus catfish. They're pretty resilient and they tend to stay out of the way.
So they know how to avoid trouble.
Exactly. But listen, even with these guys, you got to
Right.
keep a close eye on them. You never know when things might go south.
Good advice. And just to be clear, who should absolutely never share a tank with a peacock base?
Oh, anything small and delicate. Tetras, guppies, angelfish, they're all goners. Don't even think about it. It's like sending them into a lion's den.
Yikes. Okay, message received. Only the toughest of the tough. No delicate little guys.
Exactly. You got it. And now that we've covered the tank mates, let's talk about keeping those peacock bays healthy. It's amazing how diverse peacock bay species are. It's not just about size.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, their colors, their temperament, it can all be pretty different.
So what kind of variations are we talking about? Give me the details.
Well, like, take the Cycla ocellaris, the most common one. They're known for those awesome eye spots, the ones near their tail and their colors. It's usually like a mix of greens and blues. Sometimes you even get some reddish-orange accents.
Wow. Sounds like they're practically glowing, like underwater jewels.
They are pretty stunning. And then there's the Cycla monoculus. They tend to have more yellow and those bold black bars running down their sides. Those are pretty cool.
And what about the cyclotamensis, the giants? What makes those guys special?
Oh, the Temensis. Now, those are something else. Their colors are intense, especially when it's breeding time. We're talking bright reds, oranges, yellows, the whole shebang. They're really something to see.
I can see why people get so hooked on these fish. It's more than just a pet. It's like having a living work of art in your tank.
It is, isn't it? And their personalities are just as diverse as their looks. Some are super bold, others are more laid back. It's crazy how much variation you can find, even within the same species.
So each one is like its own little character that makes it even more interesting because you're always learning something new, always watching them.
Exactly. It's like having a little piece of the Amazon in your living room. All that complexity, all that wonder right there in your tank.
I love that. It's like, it's not just about keeping them alive, it's about building a relationship with them, understanding them, respecting them, and that takes time and effort. Speaking of effort, let's talk about tank setup again. I know we talked about size and stuff, but what about making it feel like home? What are those little touches that really make a difference?
Well, think about where they come from. The Amazon. It's not just an empty space, right? It's a whole world.
Yeah.
Branches, rocks, plants everywhere. You got to recreate that in their tank.
So we want to give them that feeling of security, make it interesting for them.
Exactly. Driftwood is great. It's sturdy, provides hiding spots, and it releases tannins into the water.
Tannins.
Yeah, it's like that lowers the pH a little bit, gives the water a more natural Amazon-like feel. Plus, peacock bays, they love to redecorate.
I've heard they're little interior designers.
They are. That's why you got to use stuff that won't topple over or create hazards. You don't want any accidents in there.
Right. Safety first. And what about plants? Are there any that can survive the peacock base treatment?
Delicate plants. No way. Forget about it. They'll be shredded in no time.
Yeah.
But there are tough plants like Java fern, Anubias, even Amazon swords. Those can hold up pretty well. Just make sure you anchor them good so they don't become snacks.
So natural looking, but functional, and definitely peacock base proof.
Exactly. You got to strike that balance. It's got to look good, but it's got to be safe for the fish too. Speaking of safety, let's go back to tank mates. I know you mentioned some that might work, but I'm curious about the worst possible choices, like the don't even think about it tank mates.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the ones that wouldn't last 5 minutes in there.
Well, anything small and delicate is a big no-no. Neon tetras, guppies, those tiny little rasboras, they'd be lunch in no time.
Like sending them to the slaughter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even some bigger fish, like angelfish. They're beautiful, but way too slow and delicate. They wouldn't stand a chance.
So tough, assertive, and maybe not too flashy. That's the key for a peacock-based tank mate.
You got it. But even with those guys, you got to be super careful. You got to monitor them all the time. Peacock bays can be unpredictable.
So even with a good mix, it's not a guarantee.
Nope. You got to be ready to intervene if things get out of hand. Better safe than sorry. What about inverts? Think we can throw some snails or shrimp in there?
Oh, good question. I've always wanted a little cleanup crew in my tank.
With peacock base, forget it. They'd be an instant snack. Peacocks are carnivores. If it's smaller than them, it's food.
Okay, no shrimp cocktail parties in the peacock base tank.
Ah.
All right, well, that settles that. Let's talk more about those hunting instincts. They're pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, peacock bays are ambush predators. It's in their DNA. They're like masters of disguise. They blend in, wait for the perfect moment, and then bam, they strike.
It's like watching a National Geographic special.
Right. And you know what's cool? You can encourage those natural hunting instincts, even in a tank.
Really? How do we do that?
Live food. You gotta give them a little challenge, a little excitement.
So feeder fish again?
Exactly. But remember, healthy feeder fish. No bringing diseases into your tank.
Right, of course. So live feeding is good, keeps them sharp, but how much is too much?
Don't overdo it. Once or twice a week is plenty. You don't want them getting spoiled or picky.
So it's a treat, not a staple.
Exactly. Got to keep it interesting. Variety is key.
And a varied diet means pellets and frozen food too, right? To make sure they're getting all the nutrients they need.
Right on. You're getting it.
Speaking of getting it, let's talk about their brains for a second. I mean, we focus a lot on their physical needs, but what about their mental well-being?
That's a great point. People often forget about that. A bored fish is a stressed fish, and a stressed fish is more likely to get sick.
So how do we keep these guys entertained?
Think about their natural environment. They're always exploring, navigating obstacles, dealing with changes in their surroundings. We got to bring some of that into their tank.
So what, like redecorating, adding new things?
Exactly. Keep things interesting. You can add floating plants, create some shade, kind of like the rainforest canopy. Anything to stimulate their senses.
I like it. It's not just about the physical space. It's about making it a fun place to live.
Right. And here's another thing that's super important observation. Just taking the time to watch them.
Really? Just watching them. That's it.
Yep. Observe their behavior. Note if their little personalities, their quirks. It's not just about keeping them alive. It's about understanding them.
It's like getting to know them, learning their language.
Exactly. And, sometimes, even with the best care, things can go wrong. They can get sick. It's part of life, right?
Yeah, that's true. You can't prevent everything. But we can be prepared. So let's talk about those pesky diseases. What are some of the common ones we need to watch out for with peacock base?
Well, itch is a big one. White spot disease.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Those little white spots all over the fish.
Yeah, it's caused by a parasite. They attach to the skin and gills. And it spreads like wildfire if you're not careful.
Especially if the water's not right. Right. I mean, if they're stressed or the water quality is bad.
Exactly. That weakens their immune system, makes them more susceptible to everything.
So what can we do to prevent it?
Stable water parameters. That's key. Quarantine any new fish before you add them to the tank. And keep things clean. Regular water changes, gravel vacuums, the whole 9 yards.
And if we do see those white spots, what do we do?
There are treatments for icks, medications and stuff. Sometimes you got to raise the water temperature a bit to speed up the parasite's life cycle, make them more vulnerable to the treatment.
So it's treatable. That's good to know. What about bacterial infections? Are those common?
Yeah, they can be. Injuries, bad water, even stress, it can all make them more vulnerable to bacteria.
So how do we know if they have a bacterial infection? What should we look for?
Redness, swelling, maybe some ulcers on their skin. Frayed fins are another sign.
Okay, and if we see any of that, what do we do?
Antibiotics. But you got to be careful. Talk to an expert, a vet, someone who knows what they're doing. Don't just go throwing meds in there willy-nilly.
Good advice. Okay, so bacterial infections, we can treat those. What about parasites?
Ugh, parasites. They're a pain. They can be internal or external. Internal ones like worms, those can cause all sorts of problems. Loss of appetite, weight loss. They can even make the fish lethargic.
So if they're not eating or they're acting sluggish, could be parasites.
Could be that's why observation's so important. If you see any changes in their behavior, anything out of the ordinary, you gotta investigate.
Like a fish detective. So if we suspect parasites, what do we do?
There are medications for that too. Different ones for different types of parasites.
Right, right. Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered ish, bacteria, and internal parasites. What about external parasites? Those little critters that latch onto their skin and gills?
Oh, those are nasty. Flukes, anchor worms, things like that. They can cause a lot of irritation and damage.
And how do we prevent those?
Quarantine. Always quarantine new fish. It's the best way to prevent introducing any unwanted hitchhikers into your tank.
And if we do find those parasites, what's the treatment?
Medications again.
Yeah.
But follow the instructions carefully. And make sure you complete the whole course of treatment, even if they start looking better.
So it's all about prevention, observation, and then prompt treatment if something does go wrong.
Exactly. And don't forget about diet. A healthy diet boosts their immune system, makes them less likely to get sick in the first place.
It's all connected, isn't it? Diet, environment, everything plays a role in their health.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
all about creating the best possible environment for these amazing fish. And speaking of amazing, are you ready to talk about breeding?
Oh, breeding. Now that's a whole other level, right? I know it's not easy, but it must be so rewarding if you can pull it off.
It is. Breeding peacock base is it's like watching a miracle happen right in front of you.
So for those brave souls who are ready to take on the challenge, let's break it down. What do we need to know about breeding tanks?
First things first, you need space. And I mean a lot of space. At least 300 gallons for a breeding pair.
Wow, 300 gallons. That's a serious commitment. Why so big?
Well, they can lay hundreds of eggs. You need space for the parents, the eggs, and all those little baby fry.
Makes sense. So big tank, check. What else?
Water quality. Got to be perfect. Stable, clean, just like their natural breeding grounds.
Okay, so what are we shooting for? What are the ideal water parameters?
Temperature around 80, 82 degrees Fahrenheit pH should be slightly acidic, like 6.5 to 7.0. You really want to mimic their natural environment.
And filtration. Lots of filtration, I'm guessing.
You bet. Those babies produce a lot of waste. You got to keep that water clean.
Okay, so big tank, perfect water, tons of filtration. Got it. What about decorations? Do they need anything special for breeding?
Well, they like to lay their eggs on flat surfaces, so you got to give them some spawning sites.
Like what? What kind of stuff?
Flat rocks, ceramic tiles, even those big pieces of slate.
And what about hiding spots for when they're feeling stressed?
Definitely. Especially for the female. Breeding can be stressful for her. Driftwood, rocks, caves, anything that makes her feel safe and secure.
So we're creating the perfect little love nest for them.
Exactly. But even with the perfect setup, they might not breed. Peacock bays can be picky about their partners.
So it's not just about the environment. They gotta like each other too.
You got it. There's got to be chemistry. They got to be compatible.
So how do we know if they're a good match? What should we look for?
Watch their behavior. Look for signs of courtship. The male will show off his fins, try to impress the female. You might see some gentle nudges and chases.
That's like a little underwater dance.
Exactly. If you see those signs, it's a good indication that they might be ready to get down to business.
So the female lays her eggs, the male fertilizes them, and then the real work begins.
That's right. Raising those baby fry is a challenge. They're tiny and delicate, and they need special care.
What kind of food do they eat?
They start with tiny stuff. Infusoria, freshly hatched brine shrimp. As they get bigger, you can gradually increase the size of their food.
And clean water is super important, right?
Absolutely. You got to keep those water changes, going to keep them healthy.
And what about protection? I'm guessing those little guys are pretty vulnerable.
You bet they are. And not just from other fish. Peacock bass fry are cannibalistic. You got to keep them separate from the adults and even from each other as they get bigger. It's like a little battle royale in there.
Wow. Peacock-based parenting sounds intense. It's clear that breeding these fish is a serious undertaking.
It is. It's a challenge. But it's also incredibly rewarding. It's like you're playing a role in continuing this amazing species.
It's like having a little piece of the Amazon right there in your tank. You're witnessing nature's magic unfold.
Exactly. And even if you're not breeding them, just observing them, learning about their behavior, it's fascinating. They're incredible creatures.
I agree. It's about more than just keeping them alive. It's about understanding them, respecting them, giving them the best possible life.
That's what it's all about. Appreciating their wild nature, their intelligence, their personalities. That's what makes keeping peacock bass so special.
Well said. Well, I think it's time to move on to the final part of our deep dive. We're going to explore the connection between their natural behaviors and the care we provide for them in our tanks. It's going to be good. Through all this talk about peacock bays, one thing that's really become clear is that we got to understand their natural behavior if we want to keep them happy and healthy in our
Yeah,
tanks.
absolutely. We can't just throw them in a tank and expect them to thrive.
Yeah.
We got to think about their instincts, their needs, their wild side.
Right, like their hunting strategies, how they defend their territory, even how they take care of their babies. Those aren't just random quirks. They're part of who they are.
Exactly. And if we ignore that, we're not giving them a good life.
Yeah.
We got to create an environment that lets them be peacock base, lets them act on those instincts.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we take all that knowledge about their behavior and actually apply it to their care?
Well, first things first, space. These fish come from huge rivers. They're not meant to be crammed into a tiny little box.
Right, we've talked about that. Big tanks, lots of horizontal space.
And it's not just about the gallons of water. It's about giving them room to move, to explore, to establish their territory.
Okay, so big tank, check. What else?
Think about how they hunt. They're ambush predators, right? They hide, they wait, then bam, they strike. We got to give them that opportunity in their tank.
So lots of cover, hiding spots, things like driftwood and rocks to break up the space and create some shadows.
Exactly. It keeps them mentally stimulated. They can use those natural hunting skills even in captivity.
Makes sense. It's not just about having a pretty tank. It's got to be functional too. It's got to work for the fish.
And speaking of functionality, we got to remember that peacock bass are super territorial.
Yeah.
They're not community fish. They want their own space.
So tank mates are crucial. Got to choose carefully.
Oh, yeah. One wrong move, and it's game over for someone in there. You got to pick fish that are tough enough to handle them, big enough, assertive enough, and definitely not something they'd see as a snack.
We talked about arowanas, some of those bigger cichlids, certain catfish. But even then, you got to keep an eye on them, right?
Always. You never know when a peacock bass might decide to throw their weight around. Got to be ready to step in if things get out of hand.
Right. Even the best laid plans can go wrong. And let's not forget about their parenting skills. They're fierce protectors of their eggs and babies.
Oh, yeah. They take parenting seriously. If you're going to breed them, you got to be ready for that. You got to respect those instincts.
Provide the right environment, the right spawning sites, and be prepared for the challenges of raising those little fry.
It's a lot of work, but it's amazing to watch.
It's like you're bringing a little piece of the Amazon into your home. You're seeing these incredible natural behaviors up close and personal.
It's a privilege, for sure. Even if you're not breeding them, just taking the time to observe them, learn about them, is fascinating.
It really makes you appreciate these fish. They're more than just decorations. They're intelligent creatures with complex behavior.
Exactly. It's not just about keeping them alive. It's about understanding them, respecting them, creating a little slice of their world where they can really thrive.
And that's what makes this hobby so rewarding, right? It's that connection, that understanding, that respect for the natural world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been awesome diving into the world of peacock bass with you. Hopefully everyone out there is feeling inspired, ready to create some amazing environments for these incredible fish.
Absolutely. Do your research, be prepared for the challenge, and get ready for an amazing journey. Keeping peacock bass is an adventure.
Happy fish keeping, everyone.